Hello, I'm Paul Behrman, and this is Talking About The Who, the podcast dedicated to that nice rock and roll band from Shepherd's Bush, London. It's November 2025 at the time of recording, and today I'm joined by Mark Wilkerson, the author of the highly acclaimed Pete Townshend biography, Who Are You? The Life of Pete Townshend, and his latest book, which also features The Who quite significantly, Hollywood Dream, the Thunderclap Newman story. Mark, welcome to Talking About The Who.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. I want to start with something I found out quite recently. Is the fact that you're not actually a full-time author, but you also work in, is it aeroplane engineering?
Yeah, I'm basically an aircraft mechanic. Right at this point in my career, I'm a manager of aircraft mechanics. So that kind of affords me the ability to decide to write books about obscure subjects like Thunderclap Newman, because I don't need to necessarily consider the commercial side of things as much. I can write about what I really, want to learn about and what I'm passionate about.
Yeah, that sounds great. So is it like a part-time job, the engineering, or is it still full-time and
Oh, it's full time.
it's
Yeah,
full-time?
yeah, yeah. So
So
yeah, that's why I get up at like 4:30 in the morning and do my writing or reading or both, and then a couple hours later I'm off to work.
oh wow,
Yeah.
that's quite a discipline.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's not necessarily, I mean, it's been mostly consistent for the last couple of decades, but there's certainly times where I slip and I'll sleep in till 6 o'clock or something like that. So, but for the most part, it's consistent, and I get a lot out of it. It's very fulfilling for me, I think, in a bunch of different ways.
Yeah, and like you said, it gives you the opportunity to write about things that you're actually passionate about, and I guess you're sort of not answering to anyone else in that respect with regards to sort of subject matter for books and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think probably most importantly for me, because they always say like write the book that you want to read. It's like I get the opportunity to learn. Like in the instance of Thunderclap Newman, this subject that there was a lot of kind of mystery around them, and I got to dig into it and kind of uncover a lot, and learn about it and actually be able to to discuss it with the people that were actually there. So, and I really get, it's a lot of joy out of that. So, all of those reasons.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, the Thunderclap Newman book came out last year at the time of recording, and I guess you're probably, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're probably the first person who's actually told their entire story.
Yes. Yeah. Which is great, because I only knew so much going in, and learned a great deal. There was just I was able to uncover so much and get so many wonderful little anecdotes from people that were there that really kind of bring everything to life. I really had amazing luck uh, in the access that I was able to get. I was almost able to speak to everybody that I wanted to speak to, which is pretty amazing. And at the top of the pile, of course, was Pete, who was really excited about the subject. So that was a thrill too, of course, that he was on board with it. So
Oh, I can well imagine. I mean, we're going to go a bit deeper into the Thunderclap Newman book and obviously Pete
yeah,
Townshend's and the Who's connection to them because it's quite significant, as I said at the top there. But another thing I found out recently is that you also spent some time in the army. Can you tell us a
yeah.
little bit about that?
So I was born in the UK. You can't tell anymore, but but well, maybe my musical taste, but the accent disappeared a long time ago. I was born in Birmingham, and we moved around quite a bit. But lived up in Barry for a while, lived in Leicester for a while, but we wound up when I was 14 moving to the States. Um, And when so I went straight into high school. We moved to Cincinnati. And when I was 18, when I graduated from high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And one day the Army recruiter called me. That was all there was to it, really. I mean, there was very little thought. But the field I went into, I was interested in working on things and working with my hands. So I went into aircraft maintenance. I was a helicopter crew chief in the Army, for in the U.S. Army for 8 years. So
Wow.
um, yeah, so that's kind of what launched my day job, working on aircraft. Started there. But yeah, so from 1988 to 1996, I was in the Army.
And would that army experience has that helped with the discipline of, as you say, getting up early, writing or researching for a couple of hours before going to your proper job, if you like?
Yeah, I've never really thought about it like that, but maybe it certainly taught me to grow up, and I needed that looking back. But yeah, maybe it did kind of instill a little bit of discipline, maybe a little bit of uh, yeah, work ethic kind of thing. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's quite
certainly didn't
impressive.
hurt.
It is quite impressive for, well, for speaking personally, just still trying to kind of work out my process for making the podcast and balancing kind of putting episodes together with the research involved and that kind of thing. And I've been doing it for about 18 months now. I still don't quite think I've quite got the process nailed down, but
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, a couple of hours a day before going to work. That's yeah, that's impressive.
Yeah, yeah, but it really, if you get, and I'm sure you get the same from doing the podcast and from speaking to people. If you get a level of fulfillment out of it, then it's not a chore. I mean, you're not doing this grudgingly.
Well, that's
It's
it.
like, yeah. So if you get, so it makes it a lot easier. And I know, like I said, there's some mornings where I don't get out of bed and I'll regret it. It's almost like an exercise thing, like
Mm.
people that like to run or whatever else, you don't feel right if you don't do it. So it kind of helps, um, I don't know, keep me grounded or centered or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what is it that made you first want to become an author after spending 8 years in the army?
I think I was always interested in writing, but I certainly didn't have any kind of level of confidence to think I'm going to write a book or anything like that. But I always did well, like in writing classes and things like that. But the thing that really triggered it, for whatever reason, was I read a book about Pete in 97, 96, 97. And I was obviously back then, I was a big fan of The Who and Pete, and his music meant a lot to me at that point. And I read the book and I just thought, this doesn't, a lot of the information in there seemed to me to be misleading or incorrect. And I started doing my own research, just because I wanted to. I started collecting old Melody Maker articles or Rolling Stone articles and just, just a pile of secondhand information over the years. And then I started, for whatever reason, I don't really know why. I guess it was just curiosity. I started writing out like a narrative. If I had a whole bunch of information where I felt like I kind of had a good handle on what happened around the Who by Numbers years or something like that, I would just like create almost like, well, it turned out to be a chapter, but like a narrative just based on all this secondhand information. Because I was at that point an aircraft mechanic living in Louisville, Kentucky. I wasn't exactly, a Who authority or anything, or somebody that anybody that was involved would want to talk to. And I wound up after a few years, well, after 7 or 8 years, putting it online. I thought, I've probably got more than anybody else has at this point. Or certainly more than I'd ever seen anybody put out there. So I started a website in probably 2005. And I kind of like Brian Cady, the guy who does the Who this month, which is a fabulous resource. He had a little feedback button, like, hey, if I get anything wrong, please contact me here. So I added something similar, hey, if you have any feedback for me, or if I got something wrong, please contact me. And I got some feedback from people. One person in particular that knew Pete, and they said this specific chapter really nails it, and it affected me, and it brought me back to that time, and I was like, wow, that's amazing. And the other feedback that I got from people was, this is incredibly hard to read on a web page. So that's why I ended up. So what I did was I did like a chapter a week or whatever, that I put out there, and then eventually I self-published a book to satisfy the people that said it was hard to read, which it was.
Yeah. And was the feedback you got mostly polite as well? If anyone did correct anything you might have had wrong, because I
Yeah,
know,
actually, it was all. I mean, because I didn't get a ton. It's not like a lot of people were reading this thing online, as far as I know. Um, but yeah, I didn't get any that were that was negative at all. It seems like, and maybe it's a little different now because it's so easy to just say stupid things on the internet anonymously. But for the most part, I think if somebody does, unless somebody really hates what you've created, for the most part, if they don't like what you've done, they're just going to not pay any attention to it. They're not gonna. I mean, if I don't like something, I'm probably not going to take the time to send an email or something like that, unless I know some information is incorrect, or you know what I mean.
yeah, that's it. I mean, some people
Yeah.
would go beyond and send something horrible,
Oh
but
yeah, yeah,
I think they're the minority, or I like to think they are anyway.
yeah.
Hello, Paul here. Just a quick note to tell you about our Talking About the Who membership, which grants you access to a load of bonus episodes and exclusive content, and is just £3 or $4 a month. All the details can be found at talkingaboutthewho.com. And please take a few seconds to like and subscribe on YouTube, or rate and review on your podcast app. It goes a long way to supporting us. And now, back to the episode. So what was the process from the self-publishing to having the book uh, published? I guess professionally, is it
Yeah,
omnibus press?
conventionally is usually
Yeah.
the yeah. So so like I said, the vast majority of the information that I had gathered was secondhand. I was probably at that point scared to death to interview somebody, because I'd never done it before, because I was an aircraft mechanic, and and also, I had no kind of platform as far as, hey, this is why I want to talk to you or whatever. I remember, so these are the years when Pete had his website going, and it was a really active site. And I remember sending a request, I guess, for feedback or an interview or something to like webmaster at PeteTownsend.com or whatever it was. And Matt Kent emailed me back. And I remember, I don't know how we got to this, but I remember going back and forth with him, and sending him some chapters and things. And he was really encouraging. And nobody had encouraged me with this thing, because everybody, I mean, I would talk to people at work about it and be like, have you ever met this guy? I'm like, no. I'm like, why are you writing a book about it? It's easy to kind of squish people's ideas and dreams sometimes, but I don't know why I did it. I just, I was curious. But anyway, Matt encouraged me. He was like, "This is really good. You should keep doing it." For whatever reason, he encouraged me, and he was coming from a place of some authority, as far as to me, because he was working for Pete, and writing things on the website, and creating content. And I thought, and of course, from his uh, status as a Who expert as well.
Hmm.
So that really made a difference. He was the first person to really encourage me. But I asked for an interview with Pete, and of course, it was turned down because didn't know who the heck I was. So anyway, I self-published that book in late 2005, and in 2006 there was a Who convention at Bush Hall in Shepherd's Bush, and I was invited to go. So I packed up two suitcases full of my book and dragged them down to Bush Hall, you know. But the day before, I went to Richmond Hill just to look at Pete's house. It's the only time in my entire life I've ever been to Richmond Hill, and walked outside his house, which was right, you know, the Wick was right. It's right on the street. It's not like surrounded by walls or fences or anything like that. It's right on the street. And I walked up and just looked around, you know, just walked past it, didn't knock on the door or anything like that. I'm not gonna do that. But and I was there for, you know, 5 minutes, if that. Like walked past, kind of looked around a little bit, turned to walk away, and the front door opens, and somebody comes out, and like I can see his back, and then a guy comes out behind him, and I'm like, oh my God, that's Pete. And it turns out it was a car salesman in front of him, and there was a Ferrari sitting on the street right outside the house. And you know, when you're famous, they bring the car to you, and you know, so he was showing him this Ferrari, and I thought, I'm gonna have to, you know, say hello. I'm gonna have to introduce myself. At that point, my book was out. Pete had declined an interview, and but I had sent copies probably to Matt and to Pete, certainly to Pete. Um, and I walked up and introduced myself, scared to death because I know that Pete can, you know, he can tear you down if he's not in the right mood. um, and he, you know, the I guess the light went on as far as who I was and my book. And he talked to me for like 10 or 15 minutes, just standing there next to this car salesman who was probably like, you know, looking at his watch, like, come on, guy. But at the end of that, you know, he said, we talked about the book that I had read back in the 90s. We talked about, you know, his house and a couple other things. But um, at the end of it, he shook my hand and he said, I'm really, really pleased that you put that book out. Um, and a couple of days later, I got an email from Pete's assistant saying, "Hey, that interview you wanted to do, he'll do it." Which of course changed everything. So now I have a self-published book, but I also have an interview with Pete. It was an email interview that was conducted while the Who were on tour in late 2006. So for a biography, it was a very small interview. It was about 10 pages of Word document, which is a pretty good size, you know, a lot of words, but when you spread that out into a book, it's tiny.
Hmm.
But the key was Pete had provided me with input specifically for a book about him. And that opened up the door to other interviews. So now I was able to interview Simon Townsend. I was able to interview John Astley in the house that John lives in, which is Pete's old house on the embankment in Twickenham, right across from Eel Pie Island, which is where the studio was that Pete, you know, recorded all his demos, and it's also where Thunderclap Newman recorded almost everything they did. And so it was in that room that I did the interview with John Astley. And Simon, I interviewed him in his house on Woodgrange Avenue, which is the house that Pete grew up in. And I also interviewed Iris Jack and a bunch of other people. And all of a sudden, now I've got you know, on top of this self-published book, I've got a bunch of new information from people who were there. So I talked to Chris Charlesworth, who at the time was the managing editor at Omnibus Press, and he commissioned a book. And I thought, wow, this it's kind of easy getting a book published. Because everything just fell into place for me on that one. But I found out in the subsequent years that it is not easy to get a book published at all. It's really difficult, especially if it's something, you know, that's not necessarily about an incredibly popular subject, you know. But that's how it came to be. So it's just a crazy story. And I would go into work and be talking to people as this thing progressed over the years, and they'd just be like, "This is ridiculous!" Like the stuff that happens to me. It's just it's amazing. And of course, there were highs and lows, and I would be, when I sent off the questions to interview Pete, I remember, what if he doesn't respond, or things like that. But it all worked out, and it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it really is. How long did you have to wait before he came back to you with his answers?
I would probably a month, something like that. Maybe not even that long. Yeah, a few weeks, something like that. Not long. They were on the doing the tour for I guess Endless Wire
Hmm.
at the time. So
It
they
really
were in
does
New
feel like, I guess, like the stars had aligned, and if you'd have been at his house maybe 10 minutes earlier, he may not have
Yeah,
walked out. And
yeah. It was
but
just complete dumb luck that he just happened to come out at that time. And then yeah, the next day was the Who convention, and I sold all my books, and I got to see Roger was there and Simon. They played some songs together. Um, and it was amazing. All of a sudden, I'm in a room full of people that are kind of, like me. They all share the same sickness.
of which there's no cure, no miracle cure, we should say.
Yes, exactly.
Did you get a chance to speak to Roger at the convention?
No,
No.
no, and I wouldn't. I would have been scared to death. But no, I was very much just kind of standing off to the side and behind my table. But Simon's band at the time was Casbah Club, which was him and Bruce Foxton from the Jam and Mark Brzezicki. So I was like, wow, these guys, the Jam are one of my favorite bands too. I when I was still in the UK, the mod revival was going on, late 70s, and the Jam were huge. So that was another real thrill for me.
Yeah, I can well imagine. It must have been a fantastic day. Um,
Yeah,
and going back to speaking to Pete, I'm guessing it must have given you a real confidence boost to be able to speak to him for 10, 15 minutes in person, and then to get given that interview and everything else. Because as you say, he said no originally just because he didn't know who you were, but that I
yeah,
imagine that must have felt pretty good to have got his blessing just after like a
yeah. A
short
lot of
meeting like
steps
that.
along the way of that book um, reaching publication from Omnibus Press, there were lots of incremental, gains with confidence,
Hmm.
which I had, very little at the beginning. Where I'm like, wow, this guy's letting me interview him. I have no idea how to do an interview. You know what I mean? It's like it's everybody that's doing something. Like there was a time where you did your very first, interview and podcast, and it's like you really have no clue what you're doing when you first do it. You just do it. Um, but and then I'm just like, your confidence just grows and grows, and then I'm like, wow, this guy from Omnibus Press is, he's read my self-published book, and he's willing to offer, it's at least competent.
Yeah.
So, and Matt, again, Matt really encouraged me, and that meant a lot. And yeah, it was just every step, and then I start when you let go of this thing. Well, when I self-published. Pat Gilbert did a review in Mojo of my self-published book, and again, um, it was a good review, and I was like, wow, maybe I can kind of do this. So yeah, it's been very positive confidence wise.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and before that, you said you hadn't really done any writing, maybe just sort of just at school and that kind of thing.
You know what I did? I'm just thinking back now, and I don't want to go off on a long tangent, but when I was in the army, for whatever reason, I became a fan of, and this is what I was in the army in Tennessee, Fort Campbell, Kentucky. I was in the 101st Airborne.
Oh wow, same as Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah, yeah, right. Me and Jimmy, actually,
Yeah.
and me and Jimmy were born on the same date, November 27th. Other than that, we have nothing in common, unfortunately.
That's
but
good.
but
That's good enough.
yeah, but while I was at Fort Campbell, which is yeah on the border with Kentucky and Tennessee, not exactly a hotbed for ice hockey. I became a fan of ice hockey, and I used to watch it and stuff like that. And for whatever reason, I got in touch with the local paper in Tennessee, Clarksville, Tennessee, and said, "Hey," and again, I'm a helicopter mechanic in the Army. I said, I'll write a weekly column on hockey if you'll publish it for nothing." And they said, and I sent them like an example or sample or whatever, and they said, "Yeah, okay." So I used to go down to Nashville and watch this. This is when Nashville had a minor league hockey team, and I used to go down there and watch the games and report on them. And I did some interviews too with players, which is insane because I didn't know what the hell I was doing. But yeah, so I had written that. I had done like a weekly column on, which was probably maybe for a year, if that. But so I did have a little bit of experience. But yeah, other than that, as far as book or anything, it was I was definitely in uncharted territory for me.
Yeah, probably did just enough to, I guess, have a fair idea of what you were doing, but without
Yeah,
maybe the necessary experience, like you say.
yeah,
So was that just like a hobby on the side? Oh, I just fancy doing some writing.
yep,
Yeah,
yep,
and it's carried on to this day.
yeah. And I mean, I've always loved books. I've always loved reading. I guess I've always kind of admired that craft.
Mm.
So yeah, I'll always do it. Certainly, I feel like I will. Yeah.
And you talk about your inexperience of interviewing, but last year at the time of recording, you interviewed Pete again for the Thunderclap Newman book. Is that right? You did an interview with him for the book and then interviewed him about the book live and on Zoom. Is that right?
So yeah, so when the book, when I was interviewing Pete for the book, it was via email. And this time around, when I sent him the question, so I had somehow over the years, he had emailed me a couple of times, so I had his email address, and I asked him about the Thunderclap, book. Would he be interested in stuff? And he was really interested. So then I was like, I sent him a list of questions and he sent it back like the same day, like multiple pages of stuff. And then he would send me emails just out of the blue. Oh, hey, here's a photo of Speedy. Or, and I'm just like, wow, he is really engaged. But the gathering of information from Pete, the interviewing of Pete, quote, during the creation of the book was all email. Um, when the book was closing in on completion, I emailed Pete again and said, would you be willing to do the forward?" And again, he immediately came back to me and said, yes. Um, and then when it came to time to, I'm trying to remember how this all went down. Yeah, thinking about promoting it when we were close to release, I thought about Richard Evans, the Who's webmaster. He had done some interviews, I think during COVID, I think he might have done one with Roger, and he did one with other people close to the Who. Maybe he did one with Pete as well. And he posted them online. I thought it'd be cool if Richard would do an interview with Pete about my book, maybe. So I started asking that question to Richard, I think. And I think Richard came back to me and was like, why don't you do it? And I was like, oh my God, scared. Um, and then I sent a request to Pete's assistant, I think, saying, I guess it could be either, to do a promotional interview for the book on Zoom that we could post as content, and then maybe the publisher could extract little bits of it for, social media and stuff like that. And I again was still not super confident to do a face-to-face interview with Pete. So I was like, it could be Richard Evans or it could be me. And Nicola, Pete's assistant, came back and said, Pete would like you to do it. And I was like, oh my God. So yeah, we wound up in October last year doing a Zoom interview. And then just a week ago, like a week ago last year, November 14th, Pete came to my book launch in London, and I did a Q&A, like an interview with him sitting on this little tiny stage in Soho. So yeah, I've done all of them now. I've done the Zoom thing and the face to face and email, which is ridiculous. I mean, it still hasn't sunk in, you know, everything that happened for this book and the involvement from somebody whose work has meant so much to me, so very much to me throughout my life, you know.
So when he turned up for the book launch, was it already planned that you'd be interviewing him on the stage, or was that kind of like a
Yeah,
last minute
so
thing?
when the um when we were getting ready to release the book, um I had asked Pete if he would sign if he'd be willing to sign some copies for a special edition. He said, "Yeah, I'll sign 1,000," which blew my mind. And he said, "I'll also do I'll also, help with promotional interviews like Zoom and things like that's probably where I got the Zoom idea from." But he said no, and he said I can do radio, whatever, to help get the word out. And he said, but no, nothing in person. But so I did a couple of book launch events in the States, and then I wanted to do one at, the Third Man is the publisher, and they have a Third Man Records in Soho. So I did I wanted to do a launch event over there as well. And once that was scheduled, I sent Pete an email just letting him know, just I know you've already said no to in-person events, but here's the date and the time. And he responded and said, I might be able to make it. And I'm like, oh my God. So that, sets off another whatever, several weeks of what if he comes along and, and yeah, we got confirmation about, I don't know, 2 weeks out, something like that. Yeah, this is going to happen. So yeah, it was all set up as me doing a Q&A with him for 30 minutes, and this place is tiny. The basement of Third Man in London holds 40 people. So it
Oh
was a
wow,
tiny space. Yeah. So yeah, it was planned ahead of time. Yep.
yeah. But it must have been quite an experience. I mean, you talk about how it's kind of still surreal that this has all happened because I think I've said to you before, I feel exactly the same with the podcast. Sort of got to meet a few people in person, even
Yeah.
socially, and just think, how has this happened? This is ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was writing the Thunderclap book, Richard Barnes, Pete's longtime friend and the guy who wrote Maximum R&B and came up with the name The Who, um, went to art school with Pete. He knew he was there that very first time that Pete had saw Andy Newman perform at Ealing Art School.
Mm,
So I was able to actually Pete put me in touch with him, and he had a ton of great stories. Which, if you've read the book, you know what I'm talking about. And this guy, like when I was in high school, when I was a teenager, I had multiple copies of his book because they kept falling apart. Um, and uh, and so and the ones that had fallen apart, I stuck the pages all over the wall of my bedroom because he was a graphic design student like Pete. So he was really good with that book, the photos in it, and the design of it is amazing.
yeah,
He met me in Ealing um, one spring when I was doing research for the book and walked me around Ealing, took me to the old art school, showed me the flat on Sunnyside Road where he and Pete used to live. And I'm just thinking to myself, what the hell is happening? This is amazing. Um, and then so he came to the event in Soho, the launch event, and him and Vernon Brewer, who used to be the promotions manager at Track, they took me out for a drink afterwards, and I'm just like, this is ridiculous, you know? Oh yeah, same thing, just surreal.
yeah. I know
Yeah,
exactly what you mean. But and for me personally, on top of that surrealness that this is all happening, is the fact that it started to become normal as well, and that's even more surreal. I think.
yeah, yeah. So at some point you have to kind of embrace it. And that's the thing, like, trying to get myself in the right headspace for, oh my God, tonight I'm going to be interviewing Pete on a little tiny stage. At some point it has to kick in that I got a job to do. I need to be a competent interviewer and make this worthwhile and not waste his time. So at some point you just have to kind of set that off to the side and you know and just move on. But there were times when I'm sitting there and because it was such a tiny stage, I'm sitting really close to Pete, like our feet were almost touching. I'm sitting really close to him and he would be answering a question and I would just be like, that's Pete right there, sitting right there, right next to me, And then I'm like, snap out of it. You gotta ask him another question here in a minute. So yeah, amazing.
Yeah, I can totally imagine. What was the what made you want to write the Thunderclap Newman book? Was that something you decided to do while writing the book about Pete, or was it something that came a lot later?
So the book about Pete certainly, touches on Thunderclap. Um, after so I kind of got the interview bug, I think. After my Thunderclap or after the Pete book was complete and turned in and had been published, for some reason I continued to do interviews with people. Like I interviewed Arthur Brown, I interviewed Roger Spear, and I interviewed Andy Newman all in 2009, which was a year after the book had come out. And I had some like in my head, I'm like, well, this will be for an update to the book. Well, that book's enormous. And whatever, 5 years after it was published, I asked Omnibus Press, and they're like, they couldn't justify it, I guess, financially. And I think I tried again a few years later, and it never got updated. So I interviewed Andy that summer of '09, and I talked to him for over an hour. And I don't think when you interview Andy you're going to forget it because he's just such a fascinating character, and he was so warm and enthusiastic and just wanting to share so much with somebody, and I was a willing participant, you know what I mean? um, so that left a mark on me. And I remember when I interviewed as part of the book about Pete, I talked to Chris Morfitt, who took those amazing photos of Pete, the fisheye lens photos of him in his studio, sitting with all, like laying back with all the wires around him. And he also took the photos that are inside the sleeve of the Thunderclap Newman album, and he played harmonica on that album too. So he had told me some stuff about it. And then Richard Stanley, who I also interviewed for the book about Pete, who sadly just passed away like a month ago. He had told me about Thunderclap. He was a film director that got to know Pete in the mid to late '60s, and they were really good friends for a long time. And he was around when the Thunderclap sessions were going on, so he talked to me about it. So it certainly kind of piqued my interest. During COVID, there was a series, I think it was BMG. Some publisher had was doing a series on um, record labels, independent record labels. And I thought it'd be really cool to do a book about track because that's a fascinating subject. And it's not, it would not be a dull story. So I had actually reached out to Pete probably 2020 and asked him if he would be, because, Chris Stamp's no longer with us. Kit Lambert died a long time ago. Pete would be crucial for a book about track. And he wasn't interested. He's got and actually, if you watch that Zoom interview I did with him, and at the event that we did in London, he's still got a really bad taste in his mouth about track and how it was, financially, there was a lot of misdealing going on, and it he doesn't. I specifically remember his email back to me. He said it's not a nice story, so he didn't want to proceed with a book about track. So shelved that idea. And I just remember, I guess I was listening to my interview with Andy or reading part of it or something. And I thought, what about a book about Thunderclap Newman? Because if I do a book about Thunderclap Newman, I could talk about that and these fascinating characters. Andy. Really, Andy was the only one I knew anything about at that point. I knew a little bit about Speedy. He's kind of an enigma at that point. But I thought Thunderclap is also very closely entwined with track. So I'd be able to tell some of the track story at the same time. Um, and I already had an interview with Andy, and in the meantime, he had died. Uh, and Speedy, all of the Thunderclap guys were gone. So again, Pete would be crucial to be able to tell the story. And I got in touch with him, and I had no idea how fond he was of the Thunderclap, of what they created and their time together. I had no idea. So he was just really enthusiastic about doing a book about Thunderclap. So that's how that happened. Now, of course, trying to find a publisher to publish a book about such an obscure subject. The fact that Pete did the foreword is what finally got me over the edge there, because I had, something a marketable name I could attach to it. But yeah, that's how it happened. So I managed to sneak in quite a lot about track at the same time.
Yeah, it's a good idea. But it's a fantastic book, the Thunderclap Newman book, and highly recommend it to anyone who's interested in, I guess, rock music in general. But there's a lot of there's a big Who connection, and there's a lot of Who in the book, and
Yeah,
it's nice to have the full story, because you've probably been told this before, but for me, it was always Pete played bass on Something in the Air and he produced it, and that's the Thunderclap Newman connection. But then you realize, especially, track records and everything, there's such a big connection between the Who and Thunderclap Newman. And you
yep,
mentioned track records, and kind of the mismanagement and the chaos surrounding it
yep,
was kind of a bit of a detriment to Thunderclap Newman.
yes. And I think another big piece of the story that was certainly attractive, excuse me, certainly attractive to me was it shows Pete in what I would like to think is his kind of natural habitat, which is in the studio. It's like where Pete went to art school. He's an artist. He likes to, he is at home creating. Like in the forward to the book, he says being in the studio sustains me. Like that is what he needs to kind of thrive. And the Thunderclap, and I think this is why he's so fond of it. He called the Thunderclap Newman sessions his first serious recording. It was the first time he had recorded like non-demos in his home studio. So it was kind of like his proof of concept. He talks about this in that Zoom interview I did with him too. So I think that's why it's so important to him. But I think also it that's one of the major reasons that it was important to me, is that it shows a completely different, or maybe an underreported side of Pete, in the studio creating, mentoring, and doing that side of it. So and yeah, the time period when all this was going on, it's all so closely entwined with, I mean, it was right there alongside Tommy. Um, so it's very much closely entwined with the Who, yeah, with a critical phase of the Who's arc, and it's crazy that this is like the busiest time of his career, and he took this on too. But it's like his thought is it was like a palate cleanser kind of thing. Like I needed to get away from all the heaviness of Tommy. And it was, and in my mind, the Thunderclap thing, he didn't write any of the songs or anything. He was facilitating somebody else's creation. So I think it was just like all the weight was off when he was
Mm.
doing that. There were no expectations for that band to do anything at all. And then you've got the heaviness of Tommy on the other side, where it was all on his shoulders, you know? So I think that's why, but it was crazy that he took it on. And it was just by the nature of the due to the fact that there was no time was the reason that these three guys from Thunderclap Newman got all lumped together in the same group anyway. So it's an amazing story. And the other thing I love about it is the human side of it. Regardless of this music that they created, which Pete and Speedy said it was magical. Um, the three guys and Pete, I mean, these characters are like, they're not even like real characters. And like Richard Barnes talks about Andy Newman being like, he said it's like he's a character out of a Rupert, annual. It's like he wasn't supposed to be in real life. He lives in this wonderful little cottage in a park, and he's just an odd character. And Speedy was a really fascinating and one-off character too. And Jimmy was this little child who just happened to be an amazing guitarist. So the human story of these guys, I think, is fascinating too. So there's a ton of different angles that I love about it.
Yeah, it really is fascinating. And you mentioned earlier becoming interested in kind of establishing a timeline for Pete's career, and it's something I've spoke about before. But finally having an understanding of the Who's timeline. So I knew, for example, Lifehouse, excuse me. So Lifehouse was sort of happened late 70 through 71, and then it ends up with Who's Next. But then when you look at more closely what happens in December, in January, in February, March, etc., and then from reading the book, as you mentioned, you realise, God, not only is he kind of overseeing this band and he's recording their album and playing on the album, but this is during Tommy and it's during Lifehouse.
Yeah.
It's just
Like the
amazing.
craziest. Oh, and by the way, he's got a newborn baby at home. Just the craziest amount of work. It reminds me of, like he was just really obviously like overcommitted. It reminds me of like late 70s when the Who signed a deal to do X number of albums with Warner Brothers, and he also signs a deal to do X number of solo albums at the same time, and he's just cranking out. So he's just way overcommitted. Um, but yeah, the Thunderclap thing, and that's part of the reason that Thunderclap kind of fell apart was it was in the middle of there was too much going on, you know.
Yeah. And it's interesting, you talk about Thunderclap almost being like I don't want to say a cartoon band, but I think Pete described them as three eccentrics and have kind of been thrown together. And
Yeah,
I guess in a way it shouldn't work, but it kind of, I think that's a parallel with The Who as well. They're almost like an upside down band where Keith's like the front man, John's like the lead guitarist in a way, and it shouldn't
yeah,
work, but it does. So I think there's a
yeah.
strong parallel there with Thunderclap Newman.
Yeah, I even say it in the book when I'm talking about this song that they did a B-side called Wilhelmina, which is like a polka kind of waltzy kind of song. And all of a sudden Jimmy jumps in with this freaking rock guitar solo. And I'm like, it shouldn't work, but it does. And then, in Something in the Air, um, Charles Shaw Murray from the NME said, the piano solo sounds like somebody came in from another studio or another planet and just started playing the piano. It shouldn't work, but it does for whatever reason. It does. So it's just I don't know, just yeah, like I hesitate to compare them with the Who because the Who had uh the discipline and the creative energy to keep it going. But there are some similarities, I guess, chemistry wise, where it's just if you were drawing up a band on paper, you'd be like, well, this isn't going to work, but it does. Yeah. Yeah. And I think with the Who, and I don't think this is true with Thundercloud. I think with the Who, the tension between the band members seems to have helped. Um, seems to have translated to energy and power, uh, in their creative work. And, Thunderclap, um, it seemed like the tension kind of tore them apart.
Mm.
But yeah, yeah, just very an unlikely combination of guys that produce a one-off album. Then they'll, it's a one-off. There won't be anything like it again, Um, so yeah, that's why I'm really glad that I was able to kind of I don't know, just document that really kind of fascinating chapter.
Have you got any other plans for any other Who related books or anything like that?
Not right now. Um, no, not right now. So I just did just finished a book about. So actually, when I was thinking about writing a book about Thunderclap, the first kind of format I was thinking of was the 33 and a third series, the little pocket books that are about individual albums. I had thought about doing a book about the Hollywood Dream album, but I just did a book for the 33 and a third series. They have the 33 and a third album series, but they also have one called Genre, which is about like little subgenres of music. And I just did finished one about pub rock, which was, London mid 70s rock, like the kind of the transition between prog and glam to punk, power pop, and kind of the music that so I was born in 69. The music that I first kind of woke up to, um, that I first latched onto as a young adolescent was like we talked about, the Jam, the Who during the the mod revival, Madness, those kind of the ska bands and that kind of stuff. A lot of that came out of the pub rock period, or it was kind of facilitated by pub rock. So it was music, pub rock I was too young for, but it was music that was going on during my early childhood. I certainly remember seeing, for example, Ian Dury on Top of the Pops. Like you don't forget seeing or hearing Ian Dury. And also the social stuff that was going on at the time in the mid 70s. The economy was terrible. There was violence coming over to the mainland with the IRA. There were minor strikes, the drought, and all that stuff. There was a lot of really kind of harsh social and economic stuff going on in the 70s. So this little pocket book that I just finished for the 33 and a third series kind of just explores that transition, the pub rock, and how it kind of mirrored what was going on in society at the time. And you get into Nick Lowe and Brinsley Schwartz and Dr. Feelgood and Ian Dury, Kilburn and the High Roads. Um, and those kind of bands, and it gets into later on Elvis Costello and stuff like that. So it was really interesting to research and write. I learned a lot. So that's just been completed. um I've got one other thing that might pan out kind of on the horizon, but it's not Who related. So yeah, no, nothing right now that I can think of Who relates. Somebody had told me it'd be cool to have a book of Pete quotes, because he's very quotable, like the portable Pete or something like that. So, but I'm
Yeah.
always, again, the reason I do this, I think, is, because you write just like I said at the beginning, you write the book that you want to read. So I love learning about, the music that I love. So I'd be open to it if there was something to explore that hasn't been explored yet.
Someone else who's closely associated with the Who is Eddie Vedder from Pearl Jam, and
Yep.
you co-wrote the book Pearl Jam 20. How did that come about?
So the Who Are You book, the Pete book, I wanted to get I wanted somebody to write a forward to that who was from my own generation, and who also loved Pete. And I remember reading an interview with Eddie in Rolling Stone where he said I should be sending Pete Townsend Father's Day cards. And I thought, oh, this guy feels the same way I do. Like, that's not that's not the same as saying I'm a fan of Pete. You know, it's like, oh, I'm fully, devoted to this guy. Uh, like on the bordering on unhealthy. And so
Hence the massive book about him.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure a psychologist would have a field day with me just having moved over from England, writing a book about an English guy who's the same age as my dad, but anyway, and of course, Eddie is notoriously hard to get hold of and reclusive and all that kind of stuff, or certainly was at the time. And through Pete's assistant, I got Eddie's assistant's contact information. So I sent her a request and she asked for a copy of the self because the conventionally published book wasn't out at the time. She asked for a copy of the self-published book, sent it to her. And again, this is one of these crazy days at work. Back in 2007, he calls me on my cell phone and talks to me about how much he loves the self-published book and talks to me about, how did like kind of ask me questions about my background and how I got into the Who and all that. And he wrote the foreword to the Pete book, the Who Are You book, and we over the years have kept in touch and became good friends. And we don't really talk about Pearl Jam. We talk about Pete and the Who and our kids and that kind of stuff. But yeah, in 2010, I think it was, he asked. Well, yeah, he asked me to get on board a project that was already underway, which was the writing of this Pearl Jam 20 book, which my input was the creation of a timeline. It was like the timeline format. And then Jonathan Cohen, who writes for Billboard, he did like essays on individual albums throughout it. So it was Jonathan's project, and I kind of came on board late. So, but what a again, confidence wise and just an honor to be asked to do things like that. So yeah, really proud of it.
Yeah, I can well imagine. It's interesting what you say about um kind of sending father wanting to send Father's Day cards to Pete, because I kind of feel like that about the Who in a way, because I got into them so young. I think I was about 2 or 3 years old when I was first exposed to them, and it just feels like they've been there ever since. And it does feel more than being a typical fan, I guess. It's almost like they're my family, and it's a really weird thing to explain or even try and
Yeah.
comprehend. But so I sort of have some
Yeah.
idea of what you're talking about.
Yeah. I think what kind of really cemented it for me was um, leaving the UK in 1984 when I was 14. Um, and the Who, like the Englishness of the Who, like I really latched onto it at that point, and also the difficulties of being uprooted and moved to a completely different country and culture right in the middle of your adolescence. Um, it's like Quadrophenia was like tailor made for me, you know what I mean? So I really latched on. That's when it just really sunk even deeper, um, and connected in a way that nothing else has ever connected, for me.
Can you remember that exact moment when you first discovered the Who?
Um, I remember maybe not an exact moment. I know the first content that I bought that was by The Who was a cassette of Meaty Beaty Big and Bouncy. And I used to listen to that over and over and over and over. So that was what, the songs on Meaty Beaty Big and Bouncy really, were my introduction to The Who. So it was like 79 when the Quadrophenia movie came out, The Kids Are All Right came out, The Jam were big and they were, very overtly Who influence with the Union Jacks and the stylistic, the Rickenbackers. So yeah, that's what did it for me.
And I'll ask you one final question that's Not an easy question to answer, but I've asked it to a few people, and I'll ask it to you as well. Can you sum up in a few words or sentences just what The Who mean to you?
Um, no.
It's normally what people say first.
No, I mean it's just it's a I mean it's they are um like far and above any other band. Their music just means it just connects with me. Just again, like I said earlier, it's far deeper than anything else has ever connected. Um, I think, most of it is down to, well, at its root, it's the creation, it's Pete's compositions, but then the chemistry that the four guys that happened when the four guys were either in a room or on the stage together brought it to a completely different dimension. So those elements, there's nothing else that I've experienced that's like it. And the thing is, it's weird. Like if I'm like exercising or, if I listen to music when I'm doing something, I will never listen to The Who. I won't put it on. It's not because it's not that kind of music to me. I need to sit. It's not entertainment. It's like meditative. I need to be focusing on it. It's not stuff to be going on in the background. And I can do that with other music, but not with The Who. So it's I guess I was going to say spiritual, but I mean it's that, it's a deeper thing for me. The Who have always meant so much more. And again, that's why I'm just like endlessly fascinated with the backstory and the story behind the songs, that's why I wrote the book about Pete. I kind of want to show everybody, look at everything that's going on behind this song and the meaning behind it and everything else. That's what I love about it, and that's not a few words. I'm sorry.
And there we have it, my conversation with Mark Wilkerson. There's even more of our conversation in a bonus episode available exclusively for our Talking About The Who members at talkingaboutthewho.com. It's just £3 or $4 a month to be a member and have access to all of our bonus episodes and exclusive content. Find out more at talkingaboutthewho.com. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a few seconds to like and subscribe on YouTube or rate and review on your podcast app, as it really helps us to attract more listeners and viewers. Finally, a big thank you to Amanda Evans for technical support, to Ethan Fisher for his help with this episode, and a big thank you to our special guest, Mark Wilkerson. If you want to get your hands on Mark's books about Pete Townshend and Thunderclap Newman, you'll find links in the show notes. And that's it for this episode. I'll be back in 2 weeks' time when our special guest will be singer-songwriter and recent Pete Townshend collaborator, Inga Lambu. Until then, thank you for watching, thank you for listening, look after yourselves, and as Roger Daltrey always says, be lucky. Goodbye.